Richard Petty and the Daytona 500 are synonymous with stock car racing in the US. This video shows how I built the King's 1979 winning Oldsmobile, a 1/25th scale kit from Salvinos JR, and includes everything from the initial preparation to assembly, paint and decoration, plus a number of issues you'll need to address if you ever decide to build it. G'day everyone, welcome back to the Wixie 500 YouTube channel. This is what we're building in this video, my first kit from Salvinos JR. If you've got any questions about the build, feel free to comment below and I'll try and answer them. This is the completed model and the original box art. You might notice there are some differences in the livery. For example, there's no sponsor logos right at the very tip here, whereas on the model there is. And I think the model looks stretched out longer than what the real car looks, but I don't know whether that's fact or not, but that's how it looks to me. But anyway, the photo on the box is not from race day, but the decals in the kit are correct for how it did race in the Daytona 500, as can be seen here and in countless other photos and video. This is the kit contents. There's lots of parts, lots of materials. It's quite heavily cast. But quite a few of the parts don't actually get used in the build. Salvinos, it's basically a generic stock car kit, quite a lot of this. So there's parts included that are used in different kits to what this Oldsmobile requires. Also a bit of a warning, there's a number of parts that share the same part number, and there was even things in there from memory that didn't have a part number. So if you play around with the pieces, do some test fitting, you'll work out which bits are the correct ones, but you can't just go by the numbers in the instructions and the numbers on the sprues because there's a little bit of a mismatch in a few places. And same with the instructions. Some of the pointing arrows telling you where things get located, the arrows don't point to the right places. So again, just need to carefully read them, test the fitting, and make sure you're putting it in the right place. Now, just before we get stuck into it, just a reminder that if you find this video handy, give it a thumbs up. I can't get videos out on a regular schedule that some viewers like, and the YouTube algorithm for that matter. So it's best if you subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for the notifications, so then when the next video does drop, at least you'll be told about it, and then you can decide whether you want to view it or not. Now, this is the main chassis, and it's typical of quite a few of the parts in here. There is bits and pieces of flash from the moulding, ejector pin marks, that sort of thing. So there's a bit of cleanup involved. Not unusual things to do with plastic kits, and nothing too heavy in the main. But yeah, there's trimmings that need to be done here. Now, the chassis is split into two halves, and there is a lot of ejector pin markings underneath the car. Now, I started this build being very particular with parts preparation, as I'd heard that they were quite accurate, detailed kits, but it wasn't long before I realized that that's not really the case. A lot of the model is simply generic stock car, designed to be cost effective across a wide range of kits and not unique to each particular car. And the two halves here, see there's little dots in the middle. The two halves can be joined to give different wheelbases to suit the different bodies that all of the chassis parts are designed to cover. So these are the ejector pin markings being filled with Tamiya primer. And I started doing this, but as you'll see later, I didn't get too fussed about it after a while. Of the entire chrome sprue, there's only 4 or 5 parts that you actually use in the kit, and only 2 of those warrant the chrome plating, which is the front and rear bumpers. Now, the chrome is very good. I believe it's proper real metallic chrome plating, but there's some heavy seam lines in the plastic underneath it, and also some flaws that you'd like to be able to get out. And normally what I do with most kits is strip the chrome, fix the problems, and then repaint with some sort of metallic finish like Alclad. But couldn't do this because I couldn't get the chrome to strip. And this is on the front bumper, for example. There's these weird marks in the top surface and an edging along here. I would like to have got rid of it, but simply can't because of the way the kit is manufactured. The side intrusion bars and the door frame rails are all in one piece to build up the roll cage, but as it comes from the factory, this can't actually be assembled due to this tab here at the bottom of the roll cage. This square tab has to come off. You've got to leave the part of the bar work here so that fits into a hole in the floor pan. But the instructions don't mention that. You've got to work that out for yourself. Now, you'll quickly work it out when the thing doesn't fit, but would have been nice to have that pointed out. The body shell is cast quite thick, and what that means is that when the wheels are mounted under the car, you're limited with how close you can get them to the outer edge of the body because of this thick edging. So what I have done here is I've scraped and thinned down all of the wheel arches, particularly at the top of the, I mean, it's the bottom of the photo, but it's the top of the wheel well, so that when it's time to fit the wheels, I can get them up close, tucked in underneath the bodywork. Now, there was a lot of scraping and sanding down the mold seams, thinning of the wheel arches, so a bit of work involved, nothing too difficult, and normal sort of stuff that you need to do on a plastic kit before you start putting primer on, but makes a lot of mess. These are all shavings and bits and pieces of the flash and the mold seams. I filled what I consider to be excessively large panel lines for the door. I used Tamiya putty for the front and the 2-part milliputt on the rear, just to do a bit of a comparison between the two. And I left the other side of the model stock, just so that I could do a comparison and see which one looked more realistic in the finished end product. Because with this era of NASCAR, the panels were separate. The doors don't open, but the panels were separate, but the line to separate the door from the rest of the body was very, very small. They made the fit really tight for aerodynamic reasons, and you couldn't see the panel line unless you were up really close. So I decided to fill one side, leave the other, and check out how it looks at the end of the build. This is just sanding down those panel line fills, and then there's some Tamiya grey primer used, and just sanding it all smooth, getting the body ready. Neither of the two clear pieces would fit in the body of the model. There had to be a lot of filing and trimming to get them to seat down nicely. The front windscreen included these two bracing straps molded into the plastic, which is actually incorrect because there should be 4 of them and in different positions. I could have ground it down to fix it, but I thought I'll end up doing more damage to the windscreen, so I just fixed up the edges to get it to fit and left that as it was. But once I got the windscreen fitting, when I went to test the bonnet fit, it wouldn't sit down, and that was because it was fouling on the windscreen. So the bonnet, like a lot of this model, is cast very thick, so I had to shave down and sand down this taper on the back edge of the bonnet so that it could sit down in the recess for that panel without fouling on the windscreen. So a lot of material had to be removed, but it did the job, worked fine. Here, most of the roll cage is glued together, but just dry fitting it here just to check progress. This is a piece that goes into part of the front suspension mounting, and these are ejector pin marks, and they're part of the molding process and very annoying, but common in all plastic kits. The well-engineered kits have these where they're going to be mostly invisible and out of the way, but with just a little bit of effort, it is possible to mostly get rid of them. So this is just using a hobby knife and sandpaper, largely removes them. I didn't use any filler on this particular one. Just holding the firewall in place with tape so that the glue can set on this front bar work. There's a few pieces that make this up and it fits into the firewall, so just holding the firewall secure to get the bar work on the subframe. The front bumper bar was not even close to fitting the body. I had to cut a big piece of plastic out of here so that it could fit in. This is the engine block and gearbox coming together. This chromed piece is supposed to be the carburetor. I can't recall ever seeing a chrome carburetor before, but we've got one in this kit. The thing is, this is the little mounting tab that goes in the hole in the manifold, but it didn't fit, so I had to enlarge the hole in the manifold to get the carburetor to sit down on the engine properly. It's a very basic seat, and I would say very wrong. All the speedways run anti-clockwise, therefore they build up the right-hand side of the seat to provide extra support for the driver. But this seat has got the extra support on the left-hand side, which is very wrong. I found when getting the roll cage to fit on the floor that this horizontal bar across the bottom was too long, and I had to cut it and just take a little bit of plastic out, because if I used the bar in its original length, it would pop the sides out and I couldn't get the vertical bars to mount into the floor properly. A piece of tape here is just so that the glue does not stick it to the tunnel. Again, just mocking up some of the main chassis parts, just checking how it's all going. I know some builders glue all of this together at this point in time and then paint the chassis all as one go, which from a painting perspective is nice and easy. But I wanted to detail paint some of the things that go inside and under the vehicle. Yeah, this is not all together. It's to be pulled apart and painted separately before it gets assembled. And these are the main components that mock-up is made up of. Now I've gone off order, if you like, from the instructions. I've glued the firewall to the roll cage, for example, put these rear bars on, The firewall in the rear and the front bar work is on. So that's a bit different to the kit order, but I just felt this is what worked for me because I was wanting to paint these pieces first. So it was a big late night primer session watching the Formula Ones on TV. Now I'm in Australia, so most of the Formula One races are at ridiculous times in the middle of the night. The instructions call for petty blue as the main body colour, but does not include any paint codes or examples of what that petty blue might actually be. Now I've read a number of builders use Tamiya TS23 light blue, and I've got some of that decanted in this jar here. But I've also got the SMS Bright Blue, which is an Australian product, and it's also a lacquer paint that's compatible with the Tamiya lacquer paints. And that looked to me a better match to some old photographs in magazines that I've got. This petty model is a 43rd scale resin from Spark, and the petty blue that they've used is about halfway between these two. So a mix is on the cards for the final body colour. For the chassis, I just went with the SMS product straight out of the bottle. It's airbrush ready. I just put a bit of blue tack in the hole here for where the roll cage is going to go, just to keep the paint out. And then once the paint's dry, just pull the blue tack out and it's ready for glue. These are the main chassis sections showing the masking areas that will take the glue on assembly. So I masked off here that fits the two halves together, masked off here where the firewall will go, just so that when you put the glue in, there's no paint there interfering with the way the glue interacts with the plastic. I only bothered to mask the large areas, so when it comes to fitting the fire extinguisher and that sort of stuff, I just use a bit of lacquer thinner to remove the paint from those particular fittings. Now, just as a comparison, this is the SMS blue, this is the Tamiya TS23, this is the underside of the bonnet, and I just painted that for comparison purposes to see how it would look. And as you can see there, they're quite different. So just putting some masking on to mask off the dashboard in a satin black. The roll bar padding is just hand painted with matte black. And these are just the main parts, the body primed in grey. The two sections of the chassis just together here, they're not glued, and the roll cage. The fire extinguisher was sprayed red, and then I've just used some fine strips of bare metal foil and wrapped them over the mountings to simulate the straps that hold the fire extinguisher in place. Masked and sprayed some flat aluminium on the engine assembly and some on the pedals and a few other parts. Now the engine and gearbox had previously been sprayed metallic grey, and then I've masked off the gearbox and the main block to do the alloy colour on the other areas. So when the tape's removed, you can see the contrast between the metallic grey and the aluminium colour. Now I'm not sure how realistic this is to the real thing because I haven't been able to find reference photos of the engine from in this car, and the kit instructions provide no guide whatsoever about what sorts of colours should be used on this. The seat, the shifter and the extinguisher here have been added to the floor. The seat belts are cast into the seat, and I've just hand painted those in German grey and then just used some silver to highlight the buckles and the adjusters. And you can see the bare metal foil on the straps, and I've just used silver paint on the top fitting, and a bit of a wash and some colouring over what I assume is some sort of an electronics box in the passenger side. I started adding some wash and detail to the boot area and around the fuel tank and the battery here, but then I remembered that once the body's fitted on this, it's not going to be visible, so I stopped. Now these rocker cover breathers did not fit in the rocker covers, and these are all chrome parts, and again I don't know whether this is chrome on the real car or whether it's polished alloy or painted or what. Thing is, they don't fit in the holes, so I had to drill out the mounting holes to get the breathers to fit. The air cleaner has to be mounted as low as possible so that there's clearance for the bonnet, and that is an issue that the instructions do address. This internal cutout allows the filter to sit down over the carburetor. The thing is that when it sits down over the carburetor, it was sitting up in the rocker covers, so it might be a bit hard to see in the video. I chamfered off an edge on either side of the air filter so that it would sit down a little bit closer down in the V of the engine, and those tapers just meant I've been able to just drop it down a little bit lower, just to give me some more clearance in case I needed it once the engine was in the car and trying to put the bonnet on afterwards. Test fitting here, the rear trailing arms and springs. These are the front shock absorbers and the sway bar or roll bar, whatever you want to call it, they mount onto the roll bar that's cast into the subframe. This is all just hand painted with a brush. As you've seen in other parts, the paint's removed from the gluing surfaces so that the plastic cement can do its job, plastic on plastic, rather than having paint getting in the way. Without any colour callouts in the kit, and I wasn't able to find any photos from underneath the real race car, I painted the trailing arms here and the diff and everything in semi-gloss black. I've since learned that these were often on petty cars painted in dark blue, so a bit late for this build, but handy to know if I do another petty car in the future. This is the mounting channel for the panhard rod in the rear suspension, but I had to recut this and reprofile it to fit the chassis because it just was not going to fit properly. The front suspension is assembled here, but I haven't glued the wheels on. I wanted to make sure the body was on first and fit the wheels to the body. Also, by not gluing the spindles, the top and bottom here for the upright, means this is steerable, so I'll be able to pose the steering to be going straight ahead, left or right. The distributor here had to have its bottom mounting pin removed to get it to fit, and also shaved off some of the plug lead mounting. So I was thinking of putting spark plug leads on this, but then with this hidden at the back of the engine and not fitting properly, I didn't worry about it. It's painted a mixture of gloss red and flat brown. Again, no idea if that's correct. The pulleys and pumps on the front of the engine are just painted a mixture of different metallic colours and just used Tamiya's black rubber painted on by brush. The air cleaner assembly here has got it's been painted a browny colour and then some wash over it, but it's not glued in place just in case there's some fitment issues later on in the build. It's just sitting there for the moment. And just the main sub-assemblies ready to come together. But before I glued them together, this again is dry fitting, just checking that the length, the recommended length for the chassis in the instructions and the holes in the tunnel to adjust the length of the wheelbase, just making sure that that sort of matches up with the arches in the body, in the wheel wells. So now with the two chassis halves and the roll cage glued in, we're starting to get a race car. Despite everything lining up okay in the dry fitting stage, once things went together, there was a gap here between the front bar work and the firewall. And it not only didn't reach, it didn't line up properly, so I don't know what went wrong there. So something's moved or adjusted between the dry fitting and the gluing stage. And this is just a more close-up of the interior. The dials here are decal, and according to the decals, the engine's ticking over at about 3,000 RPM, but there's no oil pressure. And this is just the rear end once it's been fitted under the car as well. The exhausts on the kit were just solid plastic, so rather than just having a blunt end for the outlet, I drilled into here and then carved out the twin openings. Then the outlets and the headers and the radiators and this ducting here was all sprayed in various different metal colours. So there's polished aluminium alclad on this lower lip of the intake ducting. It is Testa's burnt metal on the exhausts and a semi-matte aluminium or aluminum alclad on all of the different coolers. And with the coolers that had a mesh or a texture in them, I put a bit of a wash on that before they were mounted. But not all of the coolers had that. Some of these coolers were just flat. So then once the engine and tail shaft were fitted, the exhaust then went on afterwards. Now with this tail shaft, I've painted it white. I know in Australia with the Calder Park Thunderdome, I used to race HQs on the Thunderdome, and by regulation, all the tail shafts in all cars had to be painted white so that they were easy to spot if they fell out onto the track. I assume that was the case in NASCAR back in 1979, but I don't know. So anyway, I've painted it white. Correct or not? No idea. Then it was test fitting the radiator ducting here before painting it. It all fitted okay, and then this is it after the engine was fitted and the ducting has been put in place. It all fitted fine in the first place, but I did have a little bit of trouble getting the radiator in because once these coolers were in, they fouled a little bit, so I had to trim a bit of plastic off the side there to drop the radiator down, but you can't see the trimming, it's all ended up okay. Now, the rims are two pieces. There's a front face, which is this one here, and then there's a back face that get glued together when you're ready to mount the tyres. I put some black on the back facing so that when the slots, these are slots that you can see through, when they're mounted on, there's a black background. Otherwise, you're going to get white background behind the slots, and I don't think it'll look as good. with the tyres. They're proper rubber tyres, but they've got a moulding seam down the left-hand edge here, which just needs to be filed off. And one thing is it's down one side of the tyre, so I think that's a better thing. I've seen a lot of manufacturers for a Tamiya, for example, their mould seam is down the middle of the tyre. And when it's down the edge here, I just think it's better for removing, because it can then be made to look like the inner edge of a race tyre. And if those of you who might have some experience with race tyres will know the inner edging gets a bit of feathering that the outer edge doesn't get. I went to get the tyre decals to put on the tyres, the Goodyear markings, and the kit doesn't include any. I don't know why. I can't see it being a licensing issue, because the kit does include Goodyear identification from the bodywork. Anyway, so I remembered that I've got a 1/20th scale Lotus kit from Hasegawa that included these photo etch templates for the front and rear tyres in that kit. So I did some test spraying on the inner edge of the kit's tyres, and the front one is a little bit too tight on the radius, and the rear one is it's too big, it's not tight enough, the radius. So a bit of a compromise, but I ended up just going with the this template here to get the Goodyear on all of the tyres. So it's not quite perfect, but they've come up okay. The rims are painted with Tamiya TS26 white, and once the markings were done on the tyres, the two rim halves were glued together to complete the wheel. I put some metallic grey on the hub and the wheel nuts, and then afterwards put a bit of clear blue over the hub just to give it a bit of an anodized look, because that's what it looked like on the box art, and then just a little bit of a light wash. The instructions call for the wheels to be fitted to the chassis before the body goes on, but I didn't want to do that. I want to mount the wheels according to where the chassis sits, so I can get the wheels in proximity to the outer edges of the body a bit better than what the stock kit does. But the bodywork is what the part 2 video is all about, preparing and painting the body, including how I mask the livery, some scratch building of a few different components to replace the kit items, and just finishing off in the final assembly. So until then, cheers.